Hi, this is Shoshana Burgett. Welcome to colorkarma.com, History of Desktop Publishing with Frank Romano. Hi, Frank.
Hi there.
So we're back in the Museum of Printing in Haverhill, Massachusetts, and we're going to talk about the history of desktop publishing. I was a big Quarkxpress fan, but at the time there were other choices like PageMaker and other choices. Let's kick it off with that.
Well, let's understand the history of it, because it's a fascinating history. Because you had the development of the personal computer, the microprocessor. And so computers started to get smaller and smaller. And a lot of entrepreneurs started to integrate them into little systems with TV sets on them and keyboards.
Yep.
You could keyboard stuff. And they wrote programs for word processing, for spreadsheet, etc. But for desktop publishing to succeed, a lot of things had to come together. And the person that really facilitated that was Jonathan Sebald. Jonathan and his father published the major newsletter in the industry, and they were the major consultants. And as a result, vendors would have them in under non-disclosure to tell them what they were doing and get their feedback. And so Jonathan knew what Apple was doing in the development of the Macintosh.
And that was Steve Jobs.
Because Steve Jobs really only spoke at Sebald events over the years. And then Jonathan was privy to what Adobe was doing. Adobe was trying to create their own front-end system for typesetting, and PostScript was the output module to laser printer. And he also knew what was happening at PageMaker, or Aldous Corporation, where Paul Brainerd was trying to take his experience with putting pages together when he worked at Atex and Automix, and put it onto an IBM PC. So Jonathan knew what they were all doing. And pieces of it were starting to come together. Steve Jobs realized that the Macintosh, because the Lisa had not succeeded, the Macintosh would, because it would be a more powerful computer and it would have more graphics capability, but he needed type for it. And he had seen what had happened at Xerox. Xerox PARC, Palo Alto Research Center, had developed really the first interactive computer, if you will, on a network with a laser printer. They didn't know what they had.
They didn't know what they had. They had the first GUI, the first interface.
And Steve was allowed in because Xerox was going to make an investment in Apple, believe it or not. That's how it all happened. So all these pieces are out there. So Jonathan now knows all these pieces, and they're not talking to one another. And Jonathan now goes to Paul Brainerd and says, you got to go down and talk to Adobe and see what they're doing, and you got to go to Apple and talk to them about what they're doing. And then he says to Apple, you got to talk to Paul Brainerd. He says and he starts to now network them together. And so they come together. And so now Steve Jobs is creating a laser printer, the LaserWriter 1. He needs fonts, and he realizes that PostScript is the answer. So he says to Adobe, I'll give you $14 million as an investment. Get rid of that front-end system and concentrate on PostScript as the output module, which they then do. He then, because of the Apple connection, Paul Brainerd now gets away from the IBM PC initially, goes to the Macintosh. He gets one of the earliest Macintoshes to start programming it. And then he realizes, as he takes his whole crew and they drive down from Seattle to San Diego, visiting small publishing companies, that the world doesn't need the ultimate typesetting system. They need something for putting pages together in a typographic form. So he changes his philosophy and they create PageMaker. It runs on the Macintosh, and it all gets then announced in January of 1985 in Cupertino. I was there. And it was an amazing day because the Macintosh had been introduced, and now Paul Brainerd comes up with the term desktop publishing. The ability to put pages together on the screen of a computer that's interactive with real type that outputs to a laser printer, and by the way, can also output to a high-resolution device with film, which is what Linotype had, because that's how they got Linotype into the fold, by giving them the rights to PostScript for a short period of time on their image setter. And I was sitting next to these two guys from Krishna Copy. Krishna Copy was a copy center. They had 3 locations in the San Francisco area, mostly at colleges, and they had one operation on Market Street in downtown San Francisco. And they were jabbering away about how someone could put a page together, proof it on their laser printer, and then bring the file in, and they could print it out at high resolution. And it's all starting to come together. And so that becomes desktop publishing. Paul Brainerd creates the term, and it becomes the application that makes Apple. Because before that, people were just talking about word processing or spreadsheets or whatever. Here's an application that could change the printing industry.
And even back then, a lot of the other types of computers that were not Apple were still DOS prompts.
That is correct.
So now you had a GUI, an interface, and you could design and you could lay out and see all of those pages together within one file.
And Bill Gates sees what the Macintosh does, and what did they create? Windows.
Yep.
There was almost a lawsuit over that. But in any case, you now start to see the PC now comes into Windows. PageMaker moves that way. Now, there's also a competitor. Quarkxpress starts out.
I love Quark.
Now, Quark started because the guy who created it, Tim Gill, actually created a word processing program for the original Apple, the Apple I, called Word Juggler. And one of his customers said, I'd like it to be able to interface to my typesetting machine. And so he started getting involved in type and created Quarkxpress. And Quarkxpress was a better program than PageMaker was, and it immediately took off like crazy.
It was such a phenomenal application back then.
And there were many other programs that start to come. Ventura Publisher comes into use. Everybody and his uncle is starting to put something. I was in a room once at the first Macworld show with Paul Brainerd, the guys that did Manhattan Graphics, the guys that did Ready, Set, Go. These were the first programs for putting pages together on a Macintosh, really on any computer. It was amazing. And it was part of history when you think about it.
Yep.
Because what they did then changed the entire printing industry. Because it took prepress and it moved it away from the printing company to the graphic designer.
It took prepress and made it a separate area back then, because then all of a sudden you had prepress companies, because that's where I started from graphic design to prepress. We were turning around the films and the match prints to get them back to the art directors so that they could see them before they even went to the presses.
Well, now with desktop publishing, they could actually see their pages on paper beforehand. That led to the need for color, which led to desktop scanners, because you weren't going to use $1 million scanner for a Macintosh. So you needed cheaper scanners. Then you needed color printers. That got us into all kinds of printing technologies when you get right down to it. So what happened then was printing companies made a lot of money on prepress. Suddenly all that went away and it all moved to the originator.
Well, prepress still is today. Sometimes it sits in the agencies. Sometimes they're still separate from the agencies, and some are still in the printer. So they're in 3 different locations, pretty much depending on the skills of each area of where it's being done.
Well, let me give you an example. In the late 1990s, if you were doing a Yellow Pages phone book,
right?
Okay, you would sketch out the ads, you would send it to the printer, they would put it together, make a proof, and send it back to you. You go back and forth until you got what you wanted. When you were done, they would assemble all those ads in metal into pages. Then, when metal went away, they would paste them all down. The printer did all that.
Yep.
After 2000, the phone company did it. The printer lost all of that volume.
Lost all that business because now the Yellow Page companies could design it all in-house.
That is correct. So we see a major shift that graphic design now, the origination of printed material, now starts at the designer, stays at the designer until the last possible minute when the file is sent to the printing company.
Right. So we went from sketches and pencil to actual layout on a screen. Use your laser printer, do your kind of proofs, and then send it. And prepress on the other side evolved from, like you said, from metal and other forms of prepress to film.
But you know what prepress is today? It's computer to plate.
Right.
That's it. And by the way, if you're going digital, there is no plate.
There is no plate.
So I send PDF files to printers all over the United States.
And for those of our listeners, computer to plate means it actually just goes right to the printer, and the plate is printed and just loaded up right on the printer. There's no other secondary step like a film or anything else.
That's right. Of course, you had companies like Presstech that tried to make it so you made the plate on the press. Other companies tried the same thing. It didn't quite work. So today, for anybody doing offset, you send them a file, they print it, they image it with a laser on a plate, and it goes right onto the press. And by the way, the press now is totally automated to begin with. But printers lost all of that pre-press work that existed before, because there was film for a long time, there was paste up for a long time, they all went away.
But at the same time, when that moved upstream to the designers now, it also introduced a lot of problems because they didn't have the experience of sitting on the presses or working with that technology. So they didn't understand necessarily what you could or could not do on a press.
86% of all files that are sent to a printer for printing have some problem with them. I do a seminar at RIT every year for the graphic designers called How to Design Something You Can't Print. And I do it this way. Oh, it's perfectly okay to mix RGB and CMYK. Who cares? Oh, if you have something on the screen you don't like, just put a white box over it. It won't matter. It's that kind of stuff because a lot of graphic designers, when they go to design school, are not being taught the mechanics. They're being taught what design is, the history of design. They're not being taught how to do it. They are sent into the lab where some lab assistant teaches them the basics of it. But they never really get the real skill sets you get from a course.
Yep.
Because most colleges are not allowed to teach specific courses on specific programs.
Well, this is the point of Color Karma, though, is we want to help them and understand the things they can and cannot do with the technology, empowering them to leverage that technology because they can do so many things. And I mean, whether or not it's colors or fonts or media types, once they understand what they can and cannot do on that technology, it opens up a whole new world for these designers now and their printers of what they can and cannot do.
The creative possibilities are endless.
Endless.
Designers have more opportunity today to do great things than ever before. They need to know how to make that mind-computer connection, how to make it do what is in my head in terms of creativity.
So it's not necessarily about learning the different softwares. It's about teaching the different types of technology to print on and the different types of things used, whether or not that's inks or toner or inkjet or laser or offset. All of those different technologies can do different things.
This is true. By the way, I don't even think they need to know that. What they need to know is, how do I make it do what I want? How do I get it from my head to a piece of paper?
So we can have that debate because it differs by technology.
To some extent it does, but you know something? It's so close now that the same file that I send to a printer, to a printing device, I can send to a plate making device.
Yes, but how much is the pre-press costing them that they are unaware of? And what could they do? Think about the color gamut on some of these digital presses that are so much larger, right?
Oh, yes. Remember, they used to tell you that you could only do 80% of the Pantone colors. I'm now seeing 90% of the Pantone colors.
Right. And then now you have, foil stamping coming back or metallics on digital. So when do you go to digital? When do you go to offset? When do you go here? When do you do it post-press? There has to be a balance of understanding what's on the technology side so you can really, really have fun on the creative side.
No doubt about it. And again, where do you learn this stuff?
Colorkarma.com now. Or you come to the Museum of Printing
That
and
was not a
see
setup
some of
question,
this.
by the way.
That was a little bit of a setup question, but completely improv. But no, it's like you said, I was taught in School of Visual Arts, we had to mix our own Pantone colors. We had to make our own rub down fonts. We were forbidden to print on a laser printer because back then you could still stretch fonts. And that was sacrilegious to the teachers back then. Our professors would go, you will fail if you touch anything on a digital printer because we don't want to see it. We have to teach you the core. It's color photography. You start with black and white photography before you move to color. It's the same type of principle. So we have to bring that technology understanding upstream to the designers. It's going to hopefully open a Pandora's box of ways they can create and develop all these cool things.
And I don't really see seminars and training programs out there to help graphic designers adapt to all this stuff.
No, and that's really the need, and I think there's an opportunity to work with the schools. And even if you are in Massachusetts, the museum is a fabulous example of all the different types of printing technologies through centuries here of what you can and cannot do. Wood type behaves differently than metal type. Offset behaves different than digital, right? Stone behaves differently than metal, all these different things. And if you're creating something and you are unaware of these types of technologies, you're limited. It really it's a balance. It's not just saying, here's the software and I'm designing it on my screen. It's really, there's a need to go spend a day, spend a week, do an internship if you're a student at a company that is a printer. Go spend some time at a pigment company. Go spend some time at a dye house or a knitting shop. But just get some basic understanding of the technology that's being used, because then you're going to go back and you're going, I didn't know I could design that. I didn't know I could lay it out that way. I didn't know there were all these types of substrates that are tactile, or die cutting machines, or today lasers, or printing on textiles, printing on vinyl, printing on plastic, printing on label, all this stuff. Lots of opportunities.
No, you're absolutely right. We need those kinds of educational approaches, whether they're on the web, they're in person through seminars, or whatever. So you're on the right track.
So back to Quarkxpress. Quarkxpress was my favorite. I was not a fan of Aldous PageMaker, but InDesign and Adobe changed their business model, and it just took off.
Well, Quark was the dominant program.
Yep.
And by the way, I still use Quarkxpress. I do the newsletter with Quarkxpress and other things. What happened was that Adobe acquired all this.
Yep.
And they looked at PageMaker and they wanted to update it. The problem was it was 1 million lines of code, and the ability to go in there and change it was very difficult.
It was time to start all over
so
again.
So they literally started from scratch. So I was involved then. I was at RIT, and I was working with them as they were developing this. So they developed a sort of a graphics engine, and then they had specific modules for doing certain things. And that's how they sort of made this program work. And they had different names for it. InDesign was the final name, of course. It didn't sell at the very beginning. Quark still beat it in a lot of cases. But then Adobe did change their business model. They bundled it with Illustrator, Photoshop, and PDF, and Acrobat. And when they did that, because everyone needed Photoshop.
Everyone needed Photoshop, and almost everyone also needed Illustrator.
And as a result, why buy, if you're going to get it, you're going to get InDesign anyway. Why do I still need Quark? And that's how Quark declined and InDesign grew.
Right. So,
and today, InDesign is the 800-pound gorilla.
Absolutely. Adobe is the 900-pound gorilla.
Yes.
But, Adobe has grown also from just a page layout to fonts, images, music, video. They are a content management company and a content creation company.
Oh, yeah, they're growing by leaps and bounds. There's no doubt about it. So, no, Quark is still out there. Newspapers still use it. Some magazine people still use it. CorelDRAW went away. Well, pieces of everything is still around, by the way.
Pieces of it, and some of it been absorbed, some of it has disappeared. And like you said, Quark still has its faithful users.
Again, I wrote the first book on Quark and the first book on InDesign. I consider myself neutral. I think Quark is a more effective program. It's more efficient. It doesn't have all those contextual menus that you have to memorize.
Yep.
So it becomes a lot easier for me to use. But again, people have to adapt to InDesign because it's so dominant.
It's dominant, and again, it comes bundled. So again, is that an opportunity for something else, like Canva, where you do it all online? So lots of different options.
Well, let's talk about typefaces for a while, because really today, type is a big business. And so really, most people are now using Google fonts or anything they can find that's free. Because again, if you buy fonts today, it's almost like buying a program. You're buying a license. And so people are now looking for things that are free, which is why the standard 13 and 35 fonts are still being used.
Yep.
Because there's no royalty on them at all.
But it's a continuous evolution from those 80s to the 90s to the browsers. And now we have today where you design both digital, and you design apps, and you design printed content and interactive content. So, it's a balance of everything.
Absolutely right. And it all started because of desktop publishing.
Desktop publishing. So this is Shoshana Brigette and Frank Romano with the History of Desktop Publishing. Thank you very much, and tune in for next time.